My mic failed me. Hold up.
Of course, of course. One last technical run. Who else? How else could have this gone down? Well,
Of course, one last time as we go through between Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Uh, Welcome all into another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. Getting going a little bit late here, but we are going to start rolling through everything. Obviously, a ton to get to. Gonzaga, St. Mary's for the last time in the regular season is tonight. We also have a full slate of WCC games with a ton still up for grabs throughout the course of the night. Andy Patton from LockedOn Zags, we pre-recorded an interview with him. We will share that with you in just a bit. And we'll also go over some of the big news that happened over the last couple days from Oregon State with the news that Wayne Tinkle and the Beavs have decided to part ways. So we'll get into that in just a bit as well. But of course, we have to start off with what's going to be happening over in Moraga tonight, because it is Zags and Gaels. And that is one of the highlights of the night. It will be the nightcap of ESPN's slate on the big network. And you know what? This is a there's so much at stake to the sense where obviously the seeding is done. We know who 1, 2, and 3 are in the WCC tournament. Gonzaga won with the win over Portland. St. Mary's is 2, clinching that with the win over Santa Clara on Wednesday. But St. Mary's can still clinch a share of the conference championship with a win tonight. They can get back into that mode. Again, you'll have a full split with Gonzaga in the regular season. This is a rivalry game. This is the last of potentially the last as WCC members. Yes, they could still meet in the championship game in Vegas, but there's no guarantee of that this go around. And I feel like you kind of have to have the celebration of what this rivalry was, what it's definitely the two of us and many others hope it continues to be into the future, as we hope that these two teams do continue to play each other after they're out of the WCC together. But it's the marquee matchup. It is the season finale. It is the finale. It is the last game on the WCC schedule today as well. So the final regular season game this season is Zags and Gaels, and it's hard not to just get excited for the environment that this will be tonight.
so at least to start with, both of us get a delay of game warning technicals. Me for starting us late, Zach for the mic. That's just how it goes. We're all even.
It's supposed to automatically turn back on
We're,
once the recording goes. Like, I don't know what's going
we're
on
all
here.
even. We're all even here at one. Next one, we're getting texts. But going into tonight's matchup, I think when you look at everything, I think at least for me, it's the emotion that stands out above it all, because I think the Zags would love nothing more than to right some of those wrongs of the last couple of years and win a WCC championship outright inside of UCU Pavilion. I think that's something that goes a long way. I think they'd be thinking about it. I think someone chief among them, even if he's not going to say it publicly, I think Graham Ike is like, yeah, let's go. I'm ready to go to battle and get that outright WCC championship. Yes, they celebrated on the kennels floor with the clinching a share of it, but I think there's just that little bit extra sweeter tune if they could go into Moraga tonight and get that win. And conversely for St. Mary's, and try and kind of uphold the last couple of years standard, so to speak, and getting the Zags inside UCU Pavilion and trying to get, I mean, as we all know, hard place to play, 25 straight home wins for the Gaels. I mean, lots of teams go in there and they don't walk out the same. I should know. I walked in there on Wednesday. That was a game, at least in that specific fashion, I did not see coming. And I mean, they put the St. Mary's put it on Santa Clara in that respect. So I mean, when Brandy Bennett earlier this week talked about it's a rare occurrence that everything's on the line this week, and he kind of felt it, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, St. Mary's passed test 1, and I think they'll be ready to go at minimum for test number 2, and it should be a really good one tonight. I mean, you mentioned, I hope it continues. I mean, it better continue. I mean, you're going to hear it when Andy hops on later, but these coaches find a way. I don't care what you have to do. Find a way to play each other on both at the McCarthy Athletic Center and at UCU Pavilion. I will accept no other substitutions. I know they can do it. I know they can put their personal pride aside if it gets down to some negotiations. And we better see this continue, because it's one of the best rivalries along the West Coast. And I better see it on ESPN networks with Fleming and Farnham on the call, to stir that drink one more time.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of get into the matchup itself, like there's a lot. Britt, you mentioned Graham Ike and just the importance that it is for him. Like he has not had this. I mean, he's kind of started checking off some of those boxes. Like last March, it was the first time he had gotten the conference championship, tournament championship. Check that off the box. This past the time in Spokane was the first time he had beaten St. Mary's in the kennel, so he checked that off the box. And so getting a regular season conference championship was another check off the box for Graham Ike. The next one is kind of the outright championship, remembering that Gonzaga has not won an outright championship in the WCC since 2022. They shared it in 23, and St. Mary's has won the last two outright. So the Zags there is a point of pride here to go out on top of the WCC in their final season. In a league, obviously, that they have dominated over the last quarter century. And because of that, because kind of going into this, I don't think that's looking at this of like, oh, the Zags are going to come out and whatever. Like they're 2.5 point favorite coming into the matchup. At the same time, and like I feel like St. Mary's is playing much better than they were when they played each other up at the kennel. The youth of this team plays obviously better at home, which tends to happen with younger teams. They've also, again, we pointed out, they really showed out well against Santa Clara the other night in kind of the flip of like they did not play well down at the Levy Center, but they played incredibly well at UCU the other night. And so, I mean, thinking about this, the matchups, the kind of the growth and the maturation of what St. Mary's has kind of gone through, and what Gonzaga has continued to do, like Graham Ike playing at a player of the year caliber level, and then also just some of the other guys who have stepped up into roles. I think Emmanuel Innocente and what he's been able to do. You think about what Adam Miller kind of stepping up over the last couple of weeks, Tyon Grant Foster kind of being who he is, and Davis Vogel continuing to just get better and better on their side. So, I mean, this, you can kind of go back. So it was funny. There was one note I was thinking about just the totality of what St. Mary's and Gonzaga have meant as a rivalry and also as kind of a 1-2 punch in the WCC. There was one note that Jay Billis mentioned during the college game day broadcast this morning. And he basically said that no two coaches in the country have been responsible for more head coach firings than these two. And that the only ones who have really gotten out of the WCC scot-free have been Kyle Smith and Todd Golden. And I will also note that Damon Stoudemire is also on that list. So
Mark Pope, anybody?
Like that happened after he left.
That's true. But that trends could have pointed the other way on that one.
But it's definitely to the point of like you just see the level of success and how hard it has been for everybody else in the WCC because of these top two teams. The level of standard that these two have set and doing it in completely different ways. And thinking about like Gonzaga style, obviously being that run and gun, like very NBA style sort of game, where St. Mary's has the slow, drawn out, slow paced game, defense first the last few years. And I think that's always been part of the fun of this is that you have two great coaches who know who they are, know how to run their systems, and they are conflicting styles. And that's a lot of times what is this matchup is styles make fights. Whoever can control the pace more in this game, whether that be St. Mary's or Gonzaga, will tend to have the upper hand. And now kind of thinking about the matchup itself, because I think there's a few different things we can look at, because Gonzaga played well in obviously matchup one. They won that game by 8 up at the kennel, and St. Mary's really did not. Like, I mean, we were messaging back and forth during that game about how that was maybe St. Mary's worst performance of the year. That could have, like, it was, I don't know how St. Mary's was still in that ball game a lot of the time. I don't know how they led at the half of that game, which was amazing to me. But the St. Mary's team just like they find a way to still be in these games, even in opportunities where we think like, oh, they didn't play very well. They didn't play very well against Boise. They lost by 3. They didn't play very well against Gonzaga. They lost by 8. Like even in the times when they feels like they're not playing their best, they're still in these ball games. And if you can just get a few of their guys to play to their standard, their normal standard, this is a team that is going to do pretty well, I think, in this game.
I think it's a mutually exclusive thing that I'm about to say because one, I think those players are going to play like Mikey Lewis, for example, played 19 total minutes, ran off the floor at the kennel. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think Lewis just honestly came off his best all around performance of the season this past Wednesday, career high in assists. I thought he was great job at the point of attack. More than anything, I thought he took the burden off Josh Dent because Josh Dent picked up those 2 first half fouls, and sometimes it's the Randy Bennett has like admitted like they're putting a lot on his plate. They're putting a lot on Polis Morauskas' plate. So to see Mikey Lewis kind of step up, I look at him as a focal point. I look at the centers as a big focal point. Harry Wessels and Andrew McKeever, especially with it being Wessels' senior as the lone senior. I mean, they weren't effective in Spokane. I would expect that to be kind of different. Like they weren't effective at the Levy Center either. They were a hell of a lot of effective on Wednesday inside UCU, and I would kind of expect that standard to change. So when it comes to both some of the stars and some of the role players, I would expect the kind of the wick to get turned up in that department, but it's not necessarily that easy, so to speak, and not necessarily a one-to-one, I guess, substitution because you got the top 2 defensive player of the year candidates, I think, in the WCC, Emmanuel Innocenti. They're probably going to put him on Josh Dent. That's going to be a hard matchup. Jalen Morley obviously got the senior night off against Portland as he recovers from injury. We'll see how healthy he is, but I mean, we both know how effective he is when he's at minimum really close to 100% health. So when you look at those 2 guys and getting them matched up on one another, I think they really took Morauskas out of the game. And I think I want to see how kind of Morauskas kind of adjusts going forward. I want to see a little bit more of Dylan Shaw in this game. I think that's someone where I think he's a scale tipper in this game. If you can get Dylan Shaw to rip some threes and just force Gonzaga to get punished in rotation, I think that's a big deal. But do I expect St. Mary's to play better, especially from the rotation guys? Yes. Do I think Gonzaga also prevents a tough challenge in executing that? Also, yes. So really amazing chess match. You mentioned the coaches going back and forth with each other. I mean, they know each other's counters. They know each other's counters to those counters. I mean, these guys have seen each other basically since they were younger adults, kind of grow up as the elder statesmen of the WCC, at least in this year's last iteration of it. And as we both mentioned and sung the tune of, we better see it for more years to come.
And now you mentioned Jalen Worley and the importance that he's going to be in this game because he was the primary matchup for Palis Morauskas in Spokane, and he has been banged up the last few weeks. He did not play against Portland the other night for Gonzaga, and largely that was probably just to keep him healthy. Didn't really need him in that game, and clearly they did not need him in that game the other night. Because that's going to be I think the key matchup. If Palis Morauskas can play to his normal standard, that's going to be a big key in this one. He was 5 for 14 from the field in the first matchup. So they turned him into a volume shooter, not terribly effective. Also, they kept him away from the basket, which I think more than anything was the biggest key. You turned him into a perimeter shooter. You turned him into someone who had to catch it basically like 20 feet away from the basket and try to then dive back in. And that what clearly is not where he's at his best. If he can get it deeper into the post, catch it down there, that's where Morauskas is going to be best, especially when like it's not like the Gonzaga has a great rim protector on the floor at really any point, because I don't imagine we're going to see much of Diane in this game because I mean, we saw it last time. Like EK played like 35 minutes the last time these two faced off, so I wouldn't expect EK like to come off the floor much at all in this one. And then I also, and you mentioned Dylan Shaw. I like that as kind of a pick. I was thinking about him the last time through, but I'm almost thinking it is the Mikey Lewis factor here, because you mentioned the 19 minutes that he only played in the first matchup, and the other night he played great. Like I think the 7 assists was maybe the biggest kind of eye popping number for me, was because like he did turn into that ball distributor. He didn't rely nearly as much on just taking that spot up three. We saw him put it on the ground a lot more in this game, and while he wasn't always all that effective at getting to the basket and finishing, he was able to find guys cutting to the rim. I think about that one cut to where we found Rory Hawk along the baseline for that slam. That's a key. Those are the moments where you see his growth and how much better that he's getting in these matchups. And I mean, Rory Hawk's had some good moments too. The last couple of weeks, we've seen him kind of be that backup point guard as well to kind of give Josh Dent a little bit of a breather at times. So we may see some of that if Josh Dent just needs to either he gets some foul trouble, which he almost did at the Kennel last time through, or
I would argue he did that those two first half fouls. That's not part of the Randy Bennett plan.
I was like, oh, and I'm almost positive there was actually a third in there and they gave it to somebody else. It's like I was like, I'm pretty sure that was on Dent, but
that sounds right.
The officiating that night was
weird,
was shaky. So hopefully that's actually on point tonight in the final matchup between these two. As we kind of get set up, I'm going to play the interview that we had with Andy Patton here in just a moment. As you try to think about it, we'll wrap it up after the interview. What are some thoughts as you think about what Andy had to say and the matchup kind of going into tonight?
I mean, the center's got to play up to the center standard. I mean, 1 of 7 from the floor combined in Spokane, losing the rebounding battle, only 5 offensive rebounds. I don't think Dan Sheets is going to be very pleased about those numbers going forward. And Randy Bennett has mentioned that Trey Rowland, I think, have been really the big focal points of you better rebound. Like at some point, it's not what X's and O schematics we can bring to the table. It's you got to get a body on a body and go out and fight. And it's going to be a 40-minute war in Moraga. So when I look at it and I'm looking at the centers, like, are you ready to go fight a war? They absolutely were on Wednesday. Can they dial it back in once again and go out and give one last gasp inside UCU Pavilion? That's kind of where I look at it. St. Mary's going to have to do what St. Mary's does best. And when I look at Gonzaga, you know, he's had a penchant for this in the big games this season. Emmanuel Innocente has had timely offense. Now, can you avoid kind of like a shot clock grenade and Innocente has it and like it goes in, or like he's had a lot of like tip-ins off missed free throws and stuff like that. He does a lot of those little things on the margin that drive coaches crazy, but fans may not necessarily see. And I'd be intrigued to see if Gonzaga can find him to be that kind of escape once again, and if St. Mary's can kind of hold that down. And then probably my last bit here is, what is the jitterbug energy of Town Grant Foster? We don't know which way the scale is going to tip along that front. I know Andy, myself, and you talked about that, so we'll let it go as it may within that department. But that's another place where I'm looking.
All right, so we'll bring in the interview with Andy Patton, our friend over at LockedOn Zags, and we'll as we kind of review the matchup even more and what it means for both of the fan bases. All right, we are prepping for Zags and Gaels later tonight at UCU Pavilion, McEwen Pavilion, because we are going to go throwback on this one because it might be the last time that these two teams face each other, especially inside of this building. Bringing in Andy Patton from LockedOn Zags, LockedOn College Basketball Podcast. And I mean, we go into the game, we'll get into all that, but gonna go with the kind of the emotions behind what could be the final meeting between these two, what this rivalry has meant between these two squads. And as is usual, a ton of stakes going into this one. What's just been kind of like the initial thoughts as you kind of prep for this game?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think because of what happened on Wednesday with Gonzaga beating Portland and with St. Mary's beating Santa Clara, it solidified the top 3 seeds in the WCC tournament. And so it sort of took a little bit of the, I guess, pressure off of this game in some ways. But the idea that this game would have anything less than insanely high stakes is ridiculous. Like this, there is pride, there is rivalry, there is history, there is the finality of this contest in particular. And obviously, I mean, beyond that, there are other specific stakes. St. Mary's, you know, has the opportunity to take a share of the regular season title if they win this game, their NCAA tournament seeding, etc. But even if all of that was removed from this, like this game matters so much because the Gaels would love nothing more than to send Gonzaga out of the WCC with a loss in Moraga, while the Zags would love to win the WCC outright in their final season in the conference before moving to the Pac-12. Like there is there is so much history between these two programs. I've been working on a piece for Gonzaga on SI, talking about the history of these two teams and trying to find the 5 best matchups that they've played. And it's a long list of really fantastic games, season defining wins, things of that nature. And it just feels like whenever Gonzaga or St. Mary's have a huge, like, monumental momentum swinging game in their season, it is against each other. And that is because this has been one of the most historic rivalries of the past 20 years in college basketball.
And there needs to be a continuation of it.
Yes.
I mean, all three of us are going to throw down the gauntlet right now to Mark Few, Randy Bennett. Get this game scheduled against each other at each other's home courts.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be very abundantly clear about this. I want to see this game in the Kennel. I want to see this game in Moraga. I want to see it to continue for years on end. I don't care about conference affiliation or none of that. I want that known because it's the best. One of the best rivalries out west, if not the best, and one of the more underappreciated ones across the country. And I like the fact that Andy broke down every single little detail of all that, and seeing as how these teams, it's kind of the new age blood feud, at least from an outsider's perspective. Maybe not necessarily something we saw all that often in years gone by, but now as we've turned the corner into this decade, the wick's been turned up quite a bit. But when you look into this specific game, I mean, Graham Ike the first time around did Graham Ike things, put the team on his back. No Braden Huff in that one, didn't matter. Second half, the Zags really took off in there. When you look at not only him and having the inside track for player of the year at this point and doing what he does on a consistent night in, night out basis, what else do you think the Zag team needs to do on the road inside a very hostile environment?
Yeah, I think the thing that really stands out to me is Graham Ike was the MVP of this game last time. There's no debate about that. He scored 30. It was his first game back, etc. But Jalen Worley was incredibly impactful for Gonzaga in that game. He played 33 minutes. He had 10 points on 5 of 7 shooting. But more than that, he was who locked down on Paulus Morauskas. And Morauskas had 15 points, but I think it took him 14 shots to get there. And he wasn't very effective. Worley was locking him down, forcing him away from the basket. He took a lot of long twos, a lot of mid-range jumpers, really wasn't able to get comfortable offensively in that game. The next game for Gonzaga was their loss to Portland. And 2 minutes into that game, Jalen Worley suffered a thigh bruise, and he has not been remotely the same player since then. His number, he's playing like 18 minutes a game. He's averaging less than 2 rebounds a game when he was averaging like 6 or 7 as a starter before that. His explosiveness is limited. His athleticism is limited. And he sat out in Gonzaga's win against Portland on Wednesday, even though it was senior night, ostensibly because Gonzaga knew that the closest to full strength they could get him for this game in Moraga, the better, because he is vital to this team on both ends of the floor. His playmaking offensively, his ability to push the ball in transition, and then defensively, his on-ball defense, his switchability, and his ability to lock down on Paulus Morauskas, because Gonzaga's best defensive player is probably Emmanuel Inocente, but he's going to be guarding Joshua Dent in this game. And I don't think you can put Ike on Morauskas. You're going to have Ike on either McKeever or Wessels. So you could go with Tyon, I guess, but I mean, it's just not as good of an option. Worley is very important in this game for Gonzaga. And if he is limited, if he is unable to go, I think that's a huge, huge problem for the Zags in terms of winning this basketball game. They need to shut Morauskas down. They need to dominate on the boards, which they've struggled to do recently and certainly will struggle to do against this front line. And I think Worley is a big part of all of those things.
Now, I will say, like, one of the other things you mentioned, what Graham Ike is going to be able to do. Now, his success, especially probably being able to stretch out to the three-point line late in this season, is going to have that impact on both Wessels and McKeever. And really, I mean, think about back to that night, like those two were pretty ineffective all night long. The two of them combined for only 6 points. They did have 13 rebounds, but really, like, McKeever was 0 for 5 from the field. Wessels only took 2 shots and looked really kind of shell-shocked at certain points in that game. So I think about just like the effectiveness of the St. Mary's big men in this one, because I mean, obviously over the last couple of years, like we've seen where, like, obviously, like Mitchell Saxon has had some really good games. Harry Wessels himself has had some moments in this matchup as well. But in the last time out, this was leaned heavily on the Zags side. The Zags were +5 in the rebounding column. You mentioned that the last time around. And I do wonder if, like, kind of the youth of this St. Mary's squad kind of wasn't quite ready at the moment to go into the kennel and be able to pull it off. Because, I mean, as poorly as it felt like St. Mary's played all night long, and it really felt that way for the most part. I mean, they had a lead at the half in this one. They only lost this game by 8. I mean, as as much as it felt like the wheels came off of the Gaels in this one, they were hanging around all night long.
Yeah, they really were. And I think one of the main things was free throws. St. Mary's, I think, was 23 of 25, something like that from the free throw line. Gonzaga left a whole bunch of points on the board there, and they have been doing that throughout the season. They have been a pretty horrendous free throw shooting team. But I do think that the youth for St. Mary's was a factor in that game. And because of that, will be less of a factor. They won't be on the road. They'll be at home. They're obviously more experienced. Randy will have worked with those younger guys on the things they need to improve upon, worked on, McKeever, like you said, 13 combined rebounds for those guys. Feels like McKeever, a lot of them were rebounding his own misses. He just could not find a way to put the ball in the hoop. I don't think that'll be an issue for him as much in this game. Dent was pretty good in that game. I will say that based on how Gonzaga changed their strategy against Portland on Wednesday, Emmanuel Nicente is probably going to play 40 minutes in this game, and he is going to spend every single minute basically 3 inches away from Joshua Dent. Like, he's going to be right in his kitchen all game long. And I'm curious to see how he responds to that. And if St. Mary's can kind of exploit that a little bit in some ways. But yeah, I think there's that youth aspect of it for St. Mary's is something I expect to be kind of course corrected in this game. And I think that is a potential concern for Gonzaga in the sense that they will have to be ready for a team that probably won't beat themselves as much as they did in that last game. And if Gonzaga does dumb things like fouling 3-point shooters at half court, which is what they did to end the first half, and other mistakes like that, I think that could be a problem. Having said all of that, this was not a great game for Davis Vogel last time, and it was a decent but not great game for Mario Saint-Superi. They're both freshmen. They will both perhaps be more prepared for this game, although this will be a hostile road environment, which they haven't seen a ton of just because there aren't that many of them in the conference.
It's a big time emotional test, to say the least. I'm going to throw another curveball into this because as the outsider, I'm taking on the title of moderator for this. I'm turning the tide to Zach now, and I want to poke into the idea of Harry Wessels' senior night because he mentioned he hadn't talked about it. He mentioned, kind of the emotional leverage that he's kind of taken toward this game. He mentioned what it takes for the freshman on the Zag side. But I think as the lone senior, that it's something where your emotions are a little bit different entering to UCU Pavilion for the last time. He played inspired on Wednesday versus the Broncos alongside Andrew McKeever and the rest of the Gaels on the boards. But how do you think Harry Wessels kind of channels it for the better? Because Randy Bennett mentioned this is one of the first years that Harry Wessels has had expectations. He's had to kind of adventure through that with an up and down season while acknowledging that he's still improved. At the same time, how do you think Harry handles senior night?
I think it's going to be I think it'll be interesting to see because you're right. He's had some ups and downs all year long now, coming off a good game against a very good Santa Clara team. I think is going to give him some confidence kind of going into this one. Also, no one needs to tell him that he played poorly against Gonzaga. I don't think he didn't need the coaches to tell him that. He doesn't need any of us to tell him that. He's very well aware that he needed to be better in that game. And I'd expect him to have that bounce back game, to be able to be, that doesn't mean he needs to have a double or anything like that, but he needs to be able to stay in front of Graham Ike, make sure that they're protecting the basket like they do, grabbing those offensive rebounds when they get those opportunities. He has to do those things that are just expected of him. He doesn't need to be anything flashy. He doesn't need to have 15 points and 12 rebounds. It doesn't have to be that. If he can stay on the floor for 25 or so minutes, that will show that he's probably in a pretty good night because we know that he has McKeever right behind him, and whoever's playing better that night is going to have the more minutes. And if he's has 8 and 8 and he's slowing down Graham Ike, that will be a good night. So I think for him going into this one, a lot of emotions going to that one final game at UCU Pavilion in front of that crowd. But he's performed well in that moment in front of that crowd before. He did it last year when Gonzaga came to town and had maybe the biggest moment in that game at the end where he had that two-handed block on Graham Ike to what felt like sealed the deal in that one. So I'd expect him to be able to turn around, have a solid game. But that's all they really need out of him. It's kind of everybody else around him that needs to also have those games be stepped up if they're going to be able to beat the Zags tonight.
On the other side of the emotional landscape is Andy mentioned kind of the youth with the Zags and trying to stem the tide. I mean, Moraga, the Gaels have a 25-game home winning streak. I mean, it's a real hard place to play, and not just for as many of the conference foes know over the years, even dating back to non-conference. It's really hard. I'm curious Andy, how you kind of look at Tyon Grant Foster in this matchup, because it feels like the range of outcomes compared to years past with him is so high. And you can have almost prime GCU Tyon when the Zags played at Levy Center, or you can have the Tyon that's missing free throws, not making layups, committing fouls. How do you kind of foresee Tyon Grant Foster in this sort of equation, in this environment, and kind of almost being alongside the youth for that matter, and trying to corral on the road?
Well, unfortunately, I think the Tyon Grant Foster missing free throws has been kind of the one through line for him. It hasn't been something we've seen him do particularly well all season long. Shot selection for him is a big thing. And early in games, sometimes you'll see him press a little bit. I think it's telling that Gonzaga has been very steadfast in having him come off the bench. I think they view that as an area where he can be more impactful than if he were in the starting lineup. I think that made a lot of sense when Gonzaga had Huff and EK in the starting five, because you wanted kind of an injection of energy and scoring punch coming off the bench, because he was usually coming in for one of those two guys. But now I think he kind of comes in and sometimes struggles to find his spot and his place. And if he struggles early in a game, it feels like very often that ends up being kind of a challenging performance for him. Whereas if he hits his first couple of shots, has a big play, you often see that result in him having an overall productive game. Lately, what has been nice to see for Tyon is those games where the shot isn't falling, he is still finding ways to impact the game, whether it's with his passing, which is something that has improved dramatically as he has gotten more comfortable in Gonzaga's system. And I think that's a good reminder of, like, this is a kid who, he didn't get any practice time with this team before the season began because of his ongoing lawsuit with the NCAA. And so he was kind of learning on the fly, and kind of by the time he finally got used to playing the three, he ended up starting to play a lot more minutes at the four because of the injury to Huff. And so I think he's kind of still, even now as the season is winding down, still sort of finding that exact role. He is an exceptional athlete. He is a fantastic rebounder on both the offensive and defensive glass. His perimeter defense is smothering, but his shot is very, very inconsistent, and his decision-making, I mean, he shot 5 threes against Portland and did not make a single one of them. There was no reason for him to shoot as much as he did. And that is something that I could see being a problem in a game where possessions are at a premium against this St. Mary's team, against a team that is phenomenal at defending the perimeter. Tyon settling for early shots in the shot clock is going to be a big problem for Gonzaga. It didn't end up being a problem against Portland because they got a whole ton of possessions and scored nearly 90 points, but it would be a problem in this game. And so I think that Tyon's performance feels very critical to me. Probably not quite as much as Worley or Inocente or, of course, EK, but if Tyon comes in, is making plays defensively, is getting out in transition, is able to do backdoor cuts for alley-oops, which he's done in like half the games this year, and kind of quiet the crowd, I think he could be a massive difference maker. If he has a frustrating night, if he can't get his shots to fall, if he's missing at the free throw line, if he looks disengaged when he's on the floor, that's a massive weapon for Gonzaga offensively that they cannot turn to. And without Braden Huff, without an effective Tyon, I mean, unless Davis Fogel goes crazy, I'm not sure that Gonzaga would have the offensive firepower to score enough points to beat the Gaels.
Now, taking a step back on the matchup, but looking at the impact of the game itself, because obviously both Gonzaga and St. Mary's are essentially now playing for seeding at this point. St. Mary's feels like they've kind of locked up their tournament spot with the win over Santa Clara. The fact that Virginia Tech has helped them out and actually is now a top 50 net team is also part of that equation. But looking at where St. Mary's is, I think I saw them as an 8 in Joe Lunardi's latest predictions. Gonzaga is a 3. How much is this game, do you think, would impact what we might see from either one of these? And obviously, like, there's a potential that these two teams see each other in the WCC title game next week. How much can be impacted by seed lines at this stage for either of these two? It feels like maybe St. Mary's might be able to bump up if they can run the table here at the end for the Zags. It feels like 3's kind of the ceiling, and anything less than probably the clean sweep the rest of the way will probably keep them there. And if anything less than that, they're going to drop down to maybe a 4.
Yeah, that feels right. I think that's more or less the accurate statement here. In part because for Gonzaga, I mean, this is obviously a quad one opportunity for them on the road, but then their first game in the WCC tournament will be against somebody that's not Santa Clara or St. Mary's. I don't know who it will be, but either way, it'll be probably a quad three game because there's such a huge drop off. So that's not going to be a needle moving game for them resume wise. And then they'll face, if they win that game, they'll face likely either St. Mary's or Santa Clara, which will be another quad one game. So they'll have opportunities. St. Mary's, however, has potentially three quad one opportunities left with this game tonight, as well as their two games in the WCC tournament if they beat Santa Clara or whoever in the semifinal game. So I think for Gonzaga, they're probably pretty set as a three. I think if they run the table and multiple other things break their way, there's a chance they would get a 2 seed, but I would put it at like a 10, maybe 15% chance. And that's if they run the table. If they lose any game from here on out, I think that they're probably a 4 seed. It's about 50-50. If they lose this game and then win the WCC championship, I could see them still being a 3 seed. I could also see them being a 4 seed, but in Portland, which is a decent draw regardless. You don't want to be a 4 seed because a 4 seed has to play a 1 seed earlier, and the 1 seeds this year are incredibly, incredibly good. So I don't think there's as much movement for Gonzaga, but for St. Mary's, I think this is vital for kind of the same reason. You don't want to play a 1 seed in the round of 32. If you're St. Mary's and you win this game, and if you win out as St. Mary's, they're going to be a 7 seed. I think pretty likely, maybe even a 6 seed, depending on how things break. If teams like Wisconsin keep losing to Oregon, like that's going to help St. Mary's potentially move up. So I think that the Gaels have a chance to move to a 7, maybe 6 seed if they win out. Even winning this game alone might put them in that 7 conversation, and that's a much better spot to be than an 8 seed in the West, where you got to take on Tommy Lloyd in Arizona in the round of 32 in San Diego. That's not a fun draw for St. Mary's, and I think they have a lot of pressure on them to win this game and win in Vegas, because then I think you could be, again, I think you're right. Even if they lose this game and lose to Santa Clara, I think they're still in. I think it becomes a little borderline, but I think they're still in at that point. But yeah, if you win this game, you got a chance to take yourself out of that dreaded 8-9 line range.
On the other side of the NCAA tournament equation, and the last one for me is Braden Huff, and kind of how potentially he fits with things going down the line. And if I have my math correct, the timeline would get him, or 8 weeks would get him towards pretty much the rounds 1 and 2 of the NCAA tournament. How do you kind of, Andy, how do you kind of foresee kind of that equation taking shape, if he can even go at all? Like, because this is just assuming that he could even potentially get cleared, get up to speed, get ramped up. Would you kind of want to see Braden Huff as things were in the starting lineup alongside Graham Ike, or do you like him in that Talon Grant Foster inject some energy role, or how do you kind of foresee kind of that equation playing out? Because it's one that's kind of outstanding out in the wilderness. We don't necessarily know which kind of direction it's going to go, if at all, if Huff can even make it out there and recover on time.
Well, I'll tell you what, if I was Mark Few and Gonzaga, unless they were forcing me to tell what the situation was, I would play that very close to the chest, especially with the committee on last Saturday, whenever it was, when they had their top 16 reveal, and the committee chair straight up said, yeah, we dropped Texas Tech from a 3 seed to a 4 seed because of JT Toppin's injury. And obviously JT Toppin tore his ACL. Everybody saw that that's what happened. But it's like, if you're dropping teams because they're not going to have a player, and I'm Gonzaga and I am holding on to Braden Huff, I'm not going to tell you at all if I think he's going to play or not, because that doesn't do me any good. The timeline, you're correct. The 8-week mark is like exactly Selection Sunday. So in theory, his return could be in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I am frankly a little skeptical. He's still on crutches. The last time we saw him, he's putting a slight amount of weight on his leg. It's February 28th right now. We're 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday. The odds of him ramping up to the point where he can like put weight on his leg and then run at full speed and then play full speed basketball in that period of time. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not somebody who can fully, give you an insight into that, but it seems like even the slightest delay would push him out of that picture. And for Gonzaga, the risk of bringing him back if he could re-aggravate the injury feels, it doesn't feel like the juice is worth the squeeze. I know it's the NCAA tournament. I know Gonzaga's ceiling is significantly smaller without Braden Huff, but I'm not super confident that we will see him. If we do, I do think Gonzaga would start him, but I think his minutes would be limited. I mean, even still, the Jalen Worley injury situation is relevant here as well. We're kind of assuming that he's more healthy and able to go, but if he's kind of limited, maybe you start Huff, you let Worley come into the game, and you kind of just split the minutes with those guys and see if you can survive that. But I wouldn't expect Huff to play 25, 30 minutes a game. I think he might start and play like 15, 18, something like that. But it's really just hard to know because Coach Few is, in my mind, correctly playing this very, very close to the chest, waiting to see what happens on Selection Sunday.
Now, one non-Gonzaga St. Mary's question to kind of wrap it up. We're a week away from the WCC tournament, and obviously we know that there's chaos amongst all the other seeds still at this point. And without really knowing how the seeding is going to break down or anything else, who's maybe like a player or two that you're going to watch to kind of or predict that may have like a breakout tournament? Because I mean, Thomas and I were talking about it the other day, and it seems that there's just a lot of candidates who could just have really, really good showings in Vegas.
Yeah, that's a fun question. The first name that came to mind for me is Ace Glass, freshman guard for Washington State. Again, it would obviously depend on the draws and things of that nature, but I could see Glass in 2 games for Wazoo just putting up big time numbers. He scored 40 earlier in a game this year. Like, he has clearly shown an ability to be one of the most prolific scorers in the country. And Wazoo, I mean, at least in the games against Gonzaga and the few other times I've watched them, they kind of just let him operate and let him do what he wants to do. He is like far and away the most talented player on that roster from a scoring perspective. They have some 3-point shooters around him. They let him space the floor and just go to work. I could see him putting up big numbers. He seems kind of like the most obvious candidate. Obviously, there's Joel Foxwell, who breaks down defenses, as well as just about anybody, the Portland freshman who had that 27-point performance against Gonzaga at the Chiles Center, but has also had 35-point games in conference play, is just a tremendously talented player. But to me, Glass, his scoring ability in particular, I think makes him a name that they could really pop and kind of capture the attention the way that Mo Odom did last year for Pepperdine in that WCC tournament. Like, I could see Ace Glass having a similar kind of run for Wazoo.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Andy, for hopping on. It's going to be an exciting night in Moraga, exciting night in Vegas, since we're a little less than a week away from the WCC tournament starting at the Orleans Arena in what is the final version of the WCC with these 12 teams. So we're excited to get to all that. So thanks a lot, Andy, for hopping on, and we will definitely catch up with you in Vegas.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Love being on.
All right. Thanks a lot to Andy for hopping on and being able to talk about what we're going to see in Vegas. So we're looking at the clocks, and we're going to start to run through everything else that's happening tonight in the WCC. And we're going to start with what's going to be happening down at the Levy Center, which is Oregon State at Santa Clara. But of course, with that, we have to kind of lead with the elephant in the room that Wayne Tinkle and Oregon State have chosen to part ways. This doesn't really come as a surprise, really, as we've kind of seen how Oregon State has operated throughout the course of the season. And we know that Oregon State and the fans have been definitely disappointed in the last 2 years of how this team has played. But going into this matchup, yes, Wayne Tinkle will stay on until the season is complete, so he will still be on the sidelines for the matchup tonight. They did sneak away with a win against San Diego in overtime. San Diego with a furious run there at the end. But Santa Clara needs to still play well in this one. Like, this is still crunch time for the Broncos. Yes, they lost in a bit lopsided matchup in Moraga, but now this is the opportunity to kind of bounce back and get this one, because you need to at least set yourself up well to have those bigger opportunities when you get to Vegas, which is likely going to be a semifinal game against St. Mary's and then a potential final against Gonzaga.
Must win. That's all there is to it. I don't even think it needs to be any more analysis along that front for the Broncos than that. Like, win it. You just have to. You don't do it, you have forced yourself to do what you have not done, and that is go win the WCC tournament in Las Vegas. So, simple task, surely simple task, but on senior night, no less. And I do expect an inspired Oregon State team because I think this is my analysis of this game is more from the Oregon State perspective. And I wanted to kind of take a step back because I think one, though you can tell the players love Wayne Tinkle. You can see from kind of the outpouring of support online, social media, like they play for him. I also think it, and this is now a threefold thing. The second thing, I do think it was the right call. I think the body of work had shown what it is. Wayne Tinkle had just simply not won enough games. I don't think many Oregon State fans would argue. But the reason why they're have such a high affinity for Wayne Tinkle is because kind of the community member he was, the person he was. I mean, you mentioned how Oregon State operates. I mean, Scott Barnes. I mean, I don't know how it's possible for the athletic director to bungle a decision that was probably the right one and yet do so right before the season's even over. Like you couldn't even wait to do it after till the conference tournament. You just had to do it. Basically, let them know on senior night, no less, and say, yeah, no, I don't feel like it. I mean, and if there's any more ire towards the basketball program, I think it actually goes towards the athletic director and Scott Barnes compared to Wayne Tinkle himself. I've enjoyed talking with Wayne Tinkle over the years. I do understand why this decision was made, but I do find a funny irony of the fact that people aren't so, I guess, reactionary on one way or the other in terms of the actual decision being made, but rather the top line people who are in power to make the decision and seeing how the body of work is played out, both from the basketball strict program perspective and then from the outsider's view, looking from the top down, and how the athletic director needs to be looking things over with the Beavers.
I mean, this is a team that still can finish in fourth place in the WCC. They win tonight, and they're the 4 seed. Now, they could also lose this game and get a little bit of help from USF as they take on Pacific. And the Tigers, pretty much for them, it's like they just get a win. Like if they pick up a win here, and Santa Clara beats Oregon State, like they are the 4 seed. They hold the tiebreaker against the Beavers as they swept the season series. So it's not like Oregon State doesn't have something to play for tonight. Like the team is still could be a 4 seed. That's a bye all the way to the quarterfinals. So there's moments for this Beavers team. Also, I mean, like it's not like we haven't seen some teams make runs because of this. I know I've seen a few on social mentioning Dan Monson and his squad the other year, like making a run. We saw it even in the WCC a couple years ago after Lorenzo Romar was announced to be being let go, and then Pepperdine put on I don't know how you describe that game against Pacific, that opening round. Like, good God.
I'll tell you, I was in the building for that one. Like I flew in early just because I wanted to and felt like it. And what was the score? Like 39-4, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
God.
Good God.
Good times.
So sometimes you have just some teams play inspired because they love their coach. And again, like I echo what you said about Wayne Tinkle, like really good guy, like really enjoyable to talk to when we had the opportunity. But this was the right decision. The writing was kind of on the wall for a while that this decision was going to be reached. 2 tournament appearances in his 12 seasons. And of course there was the Elite 8 run in 2021. So while overall not a ton of success, there were some very high highs in the Tinkle era. So, all right, but that's not the only game mentioned. Like we also have Pacific and San Francisco. That's going to be a key matchup. That one's in Stockton. That's going to decide a lot of what's going to happen. I mean, we do still have like 3 teams that are tied at 7 and 10, both Washington State, USF, and Seattle, all kind of in that mix toward the middle. But if any one of them slips, LMU's right behind them at 6 and 11. So there's still a massive amount that's going to be decided tonight. Again, like going into tonight's games, only 4 seeds are decided: 1, 2, 3, and 12. That's it. So we're going to see a lot of mix and match. And obviously, like the big keys are who's the 4 seed, who stays out of that opening round, opening day games. Those are really the important parts. Whoever ends up like 5 through 8, like it's kind of like you just don't want to be either below that or like, because the number of teams who can sneak up top, it's just Oregon State and Pacific at this point. So limited options on top.
What a mess. What an unbridled mess. And a mess that even as much as we previewed throughout the bulk of the season, I don't think we could have envisioned this much of chaos heading into the final day of WCC regular season basketball. So prayers up to all my friends at the conference office as they try and figure that out, depending on how everything shakes out. But as you guys see on screen,
all right,
we're getting there.
All right. So because we are pressed for time, we are going to just do our award picks. We know they're going to come out on Monday or early this week. So we're just going to knock out. We won't worry about first team, second team, freshman team right now. We're just going to go over our key awards. So I think we're going to start at the top because I think this one's the slam dunk that we both have. Player of the Year, Graham Ike, right?
Correct.
All right. At the coach of the year, like we kind of went back a little bit back and forth on this one, but I think because of what's happened with Gonzaga on the injury front, like I think I have Mark Few closing it out as coach of the year.
I will co-sign that. I think this is one of his most underrated, if not best, coaching jobs that he's ever done. You mentioned all the moving parts. You lose like a top 3 player on your team basically for the bulk of the season, and you manage to uphold that standard that you have in this conference, which has been a lot more challenging at the top in recent memory. Great job by Mark Few.
All right. Who you got for DPOY?
This was a tough one. Well, it was a tough one between the final 2 that I had. And they're both between Zags. It was Innocente or Jalen Worley, but for the body of work's sake, I'm going to go with Jalen Worley.
All right, I'm flipping the script on this one. I've said it a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, that Jalen Worley had this on lock. I was wrong that he didn't, because I think the play of Emmanuel Innocente over the last month has proven that he has gotten so much better. And because he's gotten better on the offensive end, now he's able to stay on the floor all game long. So his development on that side has helped him keep up. So Innocente I've got from DPOY. Sixth man.
One, Alan Graves is the WCC sixth man of the year. He's just been an absolute tidal wave off the bench for the Broncos, saving their bacon quite a few times this season. But basically playing starters minutes with Abuki Boye always in foul trouble. But Alan Graves, that man changed a lot of Santa Clara fans' lives.
Yeah, Alan Graves is a good one. I'm going to differ with you here. I'm going with my St. Mary's guy. I'm going with Andrew McKeever. It's tough when you when you're leading the league in rebounding off the bench. He's put up a number of double doubles this year. Also another redshirt freshman that's coming back. So Andrew McKeever is definitely one I've got for six man. MJ Amy, I want to give a shout out because he was also on my list for that. Newcomer.
Give me Will Heimbrodt of Seattle U. I just think he's like the best way I can describe. He's like a pterodactyl, and he's absolutely everywhere. And I loved watching him play this season. I really did. And I think when you look at key guys who maybe go under the radar given their body of work this season, I think Will Heimbrodt is chief among them. I think Braden Maldonado's up there. I think you could be put up Tom Grant Foster in there somewhere. And there are a few other candidates that fit, but Will Heimbrodt stood out to me at least.
Yeah, and you mentioned Grant Foster. That's where I'm going. It's hard not to kind of think about the impact that he's had for the Zags, coming off the bench, getting those spot starts, because he is an absolute difference maker for them. When he goes, like, the Zags are a different animal. So I'm looking at Tyon Grant Foster, and the other one I have just like noted here as another candidate, Jalen Shelley from LMU. Like, has been really, really good all year long. No, he hasn't played the last few games, but Shelley's on that list for me. Finally, freshman, a group that probably was way more competitive than we thought it would be at the beginning of the year.
Man, there are so many options here and so many good ones at that. When we put out like go into our mind and get like through the finalists and all that, I mean, there are so many worthy winners of this one. But I will go with Joel Foxwell. I think the theatrics and showmanship, in addition to some of the individual play that he's had against a Portland team that has not been healthy for a lot of this season, been beaten and battered at times. But I really like what Joel Foxwell brought to the table this season. I think it was different what he did in the backcourt, especially when he was clicking on all cylinders.
I'm echoing Joel Foxwell on this one because the absolute like lightning performances that he's had all year long for a team that has been shorthanded. Yes, Portland's overall has not been a very good team, but you were talking about one big highlight. It has been Foxwell. And this freshman class, like, we could have gone Alan Graves, Ace Glass, Mario St. Superi, Dylan Shaw. Like, there were many, like Davis Fogel. Like, there's been this is probably the best like freshman class the WCC has seen in a very long time. When you look at just the names and explosive performances we've seen up and down the league.
I mean, we're going to have so many snubs for the all freshman team. It's going to be crazy. Like, that's, like working in the mind of a digital media strategist, I told Zach we're gonna have to have a slide with all our finalists on there because I mean there are just so many people that you can choose from, and I don't want. There's no such thing as perceived disrespect in this notion if we can get some of these finalists on screen because there are so many people worthy of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, YouTube, Twitch, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Also follow along on social media at unofficial WCC pod. It is Zags and Gaels night one last time. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.